Yes, it is me. I'm Brian Entin. Welcome to Banfield. I'm live outside the prison where all of this breaking news has been unfolding over the last couple of minutes. Erik Menendez denied parole. Ashleigh is traveling tonight. She will be joining us as soon as possible. Major breaking news out of California. Again, Menendez denied parole. The board made the call after a marathon hearing today. What does that mean for his future shot at freedom? And what does that mean for his brother Lyle, whose own parole board hearing is right here tomorrow morning? We've got friends of the brothers and our experts who are going to weigh in, and a potential bombshell video also tonight in the baby Emmanuel case. Police may have surveillance video of the moment Emmanuel's mom says her 7-month-old was kidnapped. New video. Will it back up her story of a stranger's involvement or point the finger at her? That's also coming up new in the hour. And the world's biggest art heist was supposedly solved more than 100 years ago, but was it really? Is it possible the Mona Lisa that's hanging in the Louvre is actually fake? Another story we're going to get to in the hour. But we begin with the big news that just developed inside the prison behind me. The shocking announcement out of California after more than 3 decades of watching, waiting, and praying. Erik Menendez was given the official thumbs down from a California parole board. Not eligible for parole. In making their decision, the parole board said that the horror of Erik's crime outweighed his decades of good work behind bars, referring to the years of charity that he's done with other prisoners in prison. This also means that they believe the convicted killer could still be a threat to the public. Now, if you're not one of the millions of people who recently saw a popular docudrama that retold the Menendez true crime story in excruciating detail, here is a little bit of background on all of this. Both Erik and his brother Lyle had their first murder trial in 1993 with 2 separate juries in the court. Both of those juries were hung when it came time for a verdict in 1994. And then their second trial, that one ended with convictions. That was in 1996. And after a wave of public pressure in May, a Los Angeles judge resentenced Lyle and Erik. And instead of life with no chance of parole, their new sentence was 50 years to life, a sentence that instantly made them eligible for parole because at the time of the murders, they were under 26 years old. And under California's youth offender law, there's a chance for parole before that 50-year minimum. Now, that decision is what paved the way for today's parole board hearing. Erik's hearing, Lyle's hearing again, is set for tomorrow. But the current district attorney in L.A., Nathan Hochman, he must be smiling tonight because he has made absolutely no secret of the fact that he opposes the brothers' release. He released a statement condemning the decision, reading, in part, they continue to promote a false narrative of self-defense that was rejected by the jury decades ago. We have consistently opposed their release because they have not demonstrated full insight into their crimes or shown that they have been fully rehabilitated and therefore continue to pose a risk to society. The Menendez family has released a statement in the wake of the parole board's decision. Their statement says, while we respect the decision, today's outcome was, of course, disappointing and not what we hoped for. But our belief in Erik remains unwavering, and we know he will take the board's recommendation in stride. His remorse, growth, and the positive impact that he had on others will speak for themselves. We will continue to stand by him and hold him to the hope he is able to return home soon. Tomorrow, we turn our attention to Lyle's hearing. And while it is undoubtedly difficult, we remain cautiously optimistic and hopeful that the commissioner will see in Lyle what so many others have, a man who has taken responsibility, transformed his life, and is ready to go home. Imagine for a second if tomorrow Lyle Menendez is granted parole and Erik Menendez was denied parole today. That would really be something. I actually asked their attorney, Mark Garagos, about that earlier this week, and he didn't even want to think about it. To think that that is now a possibility tomorrow is really going to be something. I want to go right now to Honore X-rated Brown, who spent 18 years in prison with Erik and Lyle. Appreciate you being with us tonight, sir. What is your initial reaction to this ruling?
Frankly, this is what I expected to occur. I believe that we would see a 3-year denial, and I also think that it's a positive outcome.
Have you spoken to Erik in the recent days or weeks? Do you know what his mood was leading up to this?
I'm actually Erik's sponsor, so I did speak to him. We had a discussion about his feelings, where his psychology was, making sure that, he was focused, and he was in good spirits and prepared to go.
And when you say you actually expected this, why do you say that?
Well, I was sentenced to 31 years to life myself. I was housed with Erik when I went to board, and I received a 3-year denial. I also had a moderate risk assessment. I did an independent risk assessment with Dr. Vickery, and I ended up with a low moderate as a result of that. So I had a low moderate from Dr. Vickery, and I had a moderate from the CDCR psychologist. I received a 3-year denial. I went back to board in 18 months. So we hear 3 years and people think that this is such a victory. I understand that Hockman is going to celebrate it as a victory. As someone who went through this process, I can assure you that coming from life without the possibility of parole to 50 years to life to a 3-year denial, which is the lowest possible denial that an inmate can receive in the state of California, that this is a victory. An 18-month period, you have to stay out of trouble, go and check off a few boxes, and you go back to board if you successfully stayed out of trouble and completed whatever they told you to do, which in my case, they literally told me to go stay out of trouble. They didn't tell me to go get a degree. It was for time, literally just so that I do more time. Sometimes it's to create distance from your most recent disciplinary infraction, whatever period of time that may have been. Not to say that that's the case for Erik, but in my circumstance, created more time, and also to allow the victim's family to acclimate to the reality that I would be going home. In this case, the victim's family is 100% of all living family members are actually requesting that allowing Erik be freed. So a 3-year denial in reality in the state of California is someone who is a formerly incarcerated person is 100% a victory. It's an 18-month period, not a 3-year period. It's an 18-month period. You return to board, and if you successfully completed what they've told you to do, you will be freed. Those who saw Charles Manson get 15-year denials, they can give you a 10-year denial, 7, 5 years, or 3. 3 is literally the lowest possible denial that the board could give you, and this is a victory for Erik Menendez.
Yeah, and that picture we were just showing on the screen, that's a new photo that was just released of Erik Menendez in the parole hearing today. And you make a good point. Yes, it was a denial. There's the picture there. But the board has now given him the opportunity to come back in 3 years and attempt parole again. So you're right. I mean, if you've been in there your whole life for most of your life, more than 3 decades, and for much of it you thought you were going to have no chance of parole, to now know that you've just got to wait 3 more years and maybe you'll get a better shot that time is obviously positive in a sense, which isn't really the way that I thought about it initially. So I'm glad you brought that up, Honoré. There's something else I want to ask you, though. So you haven't heard all of the details from the hearing yet because it was all kept secret. But I was reading the notes all day long. We just weren't allowed to report it in real time. And much of the hearing, Honoré, was spent with them going through his disciplinary history within the prison system. And while he's been on good behavior for the last several years, there were a lot of incidents early on and in the middle part of his time in prison, things that I had never really heard the details of before. You know, heroin usage, marijuana usage. He was buying cell phones for $1,000 and looking at pornography and making all sorts of calls. There was something about, which they didn't elaborate on. I didn't even understand how you could do this in prison, but something about him being part of a tax scheme, some kind of tax fraud scheme, which he admitted to. He admitted to being in a gang at one point. And when they made the decision, the board commissioner said, look, this isn't so much about the crimes that you committed, as awful as they are. This decision is really because of your behavior behind bars. Did you realize that his behavioral history was that extensive? Because in many ways, we've just been told, oh, you know, he was a pretty good prisoner.
I was aware of his disciplinary history because, you know, I was incarcerated. I was there for a significant portion of it. What I'll say is someone who is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole is going to enter that environment, specifically having committed a crime, as damaged goods, as we call it. The crime is an immutable circumstance. It's an immutable factor. There's nothing you can do. You could become Santa Claus and you can't change the horrific nature of your crime. So it's an immutable factor. Um, Disciplinary history, no one's arriving in prison who decided that for all of the reasons that have been debated, that patricide was the answer, is going to be a perfect person. I was a gang member. I wasn't a perfect person. I arrived at 17 years old facing the death penalty. I got in riots and melees and fights, and then I cleaned up my history. So they go through your initial arrival, your clinical realm, and then they go through your current behavior and your current footprint. And so this is a normal part of the process. I had to experience that as well. And I was aware that Erik had some issues as his sponsor. I was the person encouraging him not to use drugs, not to drink alcohol. It's a very hopeless environment, and people self-medicate and do a lot of things to try and maintain their sanity in that environment. And I wouldn't say that any of those things are good decisions. I cleaned up my life personally a little earlier than Erik did. I became his sponsor while he was still struggling in that period between '08 to 2010. By 2013, Erik had cleaned his life up, and including drug use, recreational or self-medication. He cleared all of that up. And by the time I arrived at RJ Donovan with him, he was the one that was Mr. Rehabilitation, had all these programs going. It was on top of his job, and it technically reversed. While I had been sponsor, he became the one who was ushering me through the programs by that period of time. So it's almost like we expect them to show perfectly fully formed. Of course, they're going to have disciplinary infractions. Of course, it's going to be a rough ride. You just got life without the possibility of parole. Your parents, rest in peace. You're responsible for it. This is an incredibly difficult thing for someone to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah, and you mentioned, well, first of all, you mentioned alcohol, and that's something that reminded me, too, during the hearing. They mentioned that he had prison wine at one point, which I hadn't heard of either, but also that he said that was his response. What you just said was essentially his response to the parole board, that when it was life without parole and he thought he had no chance of ever getting out, he just really, at that point, you just don't care as much. And, you know, he wanted to talk on the phone. He wanted to, you know, drink wine, whatever. Honore X-Rated Brown, we really appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I want to reiterate, the 3-year denial is 18 months. They bring you back in 18 months. As long as he stays out of trouble, Erik Menendez will be back before the board by February of 2027, barring some positive outcome with the habeas petition prior to that. So 18 months.
All right. Yeah, so I'll probably be staying on here again in 18 months to see what goes down. Thank you, sir. All right, I want to bring in now Carol Shapiro. She's a former parole board commissioner who knows really all of the ins and outs of these hearings. And I'm glad we have you tonight, Carol, because it was a little confusing today. I mean, this started at 8:30 this morning. We thought it would be 5 hours. It went all day long, just wrapped up right before the show started. What's your reaction? Is this what you expected?
Absolutely. I think Honore really pointed to all the issues. We are very risk averse. Parole, the purpose of parole is to look at the person who they are today and not the worst time they've ever had in their life. And I think that the disciplinary record, as was just discussed, is very normal, particularly with younger people entering a system that is really quite different from what they're used to. I'm saddened, of course, by this response. Having been on the parole board and been on decision-making side, I really think we have to stop thinking about parole being a gateway to perpetual punishment. Who are Lyle, who are Erik today, not who they were even 10 years ago. And I think it's a travesty of our justice system. Judges give a sentence for a reason, and the parole board theoretically to look at who this person is today. And as Honore said, the index crime or the crimes they were convicted of will never change. There's nothing they can do. I have a hard time believing they are at risk to the public ever. The research and data is very clear, particularly around homicides, and particularly familial homicide, which was clouded by potential domestic abuse. And the blur between victimization and committing crimes is something that we really don't consider very much in our lives. But in this case, it's so obvious. The family and the victims are interested in having the brothers come home. And honestly, the risk is so minimal if you look at any of the research. And I'm not surprised. I mean, these are become political decisions. When I was on the parole board, the district attorneys, governors, mayors, many people, Police Benevolent Association, always attacked when we released somebody who had committed a heinous offense, particularly one that was in the news.
So, Carol, what do you think is going to happen in 3 years? I mean, Honoré sounded so positive about it, almost like it was a guarantee, but it doesn't really seem like that's necessarily the case, is it?
Well, generally, when they reduce the amount of time for the next one, New York State had a very different system. You could give up to 6 months. You could give any amount of time. People who got the lowest amount of time, it was an indication that they are likely going home. So I hope to believe that, and I see no reason that the Menendez brothers wouldn't continue to be the great examples that they've been and continue with the programs that they've started and support people in the prison. I think it's going to get harder and harder to justify keeping them in prison. It's just not the purpose of parole. That's not what the board should be doing.
Well, Carol Shapiro, we appreciate your reaction to this. Thank you so much for coming on with us.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, I want to bring in now Dave Ehrenberg. He is the former state attorney for Palm Beach County in Florida. He has been watching this very, very closely. Dave, just in reaction to what Carol said, do you think the parole board thought that maybe they found some middle ground here, considering how you've got people on both sides who are so passionate about this? Let's wait 3 more years. Maybe things will, calm down a bit, and then we can take this up.
Brian, I have to disagree with your first guest, who was amazing, but I think this is a big victory for the prosecution. I do not think the parole board, who are not elected as far as I know, care about political middle ground. They gave the prosecutors a win because there was a lot of momentum to release these guys. I thought they'd be released because it's hard to say no to Kim Kardashian and Netflix and all the pressure on social media, but they said no. And they pointed specifically to his behavior behind bars, which is interesting considering it was supposed to be his good behavior that was going to set him free. And bottom line is he has not taken full responsibility for his actions. This whole shifting story, was it abuse? What was it other story? They've had ever shifting explanations from the beginning. And until he just admits that this was a brutal slaying and he did it because he wanted the money, then I don't think he should be released. At the very least, he should own up to it, and he and his brothers have not.
So I was getting the notes all day, Dave, from what was happening in the parole hearing, and we weren't allowed to report them, which was sort of like torture because I wanted to tell everybody about it. But the thing that shocked me the most is all of the disciplinary issues over the years and behavioral issues, and they sort of made it out like he was a model prisoner, but in the beginning and middle part of his sentence, he hasn't been. I mean, everything from drugs and heroin to marijuana, prison wine, cell phones that he was buying for $1,000. There was this tax fraud scheme, which I still don't understand how you participate in a tax fraud scheme in prison. There was even this incident that I hadn't heard about, what they said was excessive physical contact with his wife in a chapel, like something sexual, while the wife's daughter was there reading a book, which the parole board seemed disturbed by. And in the end, the board said that it wasn't necessarily the crimes that were the reason for the decision. It was the behavior in prison.
So interesting, because the previous DA, Garcon, said they should be released early because they were model inmates. Well, apparently they're not model inmates. I still focus, though, on their slaughter of Kitty, the mother, who they had to reload the shotgun because she didn't die right away. So they went outside, thought about it, came back in, and shot her in the face. After 10 brutal gunshots, the cops thought this was a mob hit. And originally, the Menendez brothers said it was a mob hit, and then they changed their story. They told their therapist that it was because of bad parenting by their father. Didn't mention sexual abuse, by the way. That came later. So all that combined with this, as you said, that they weren't model prisoners after all, it sort of pokes holes in the narrative that's been put out there on social media and by celebrities and by Netflix. So today was a victory for prosecutors. I do think that there is absolutely no guarantee they'll be released in 3 years, nor should they be.
Yeah, man. All right, Dave, good to see you. Thank you for coming on tonight with us for this breaking news. I'll see you soon, my friend. Coming up, she said a stranger took her baby in the parking lot of a sporting goods store, but could a brand new surveillance video change everything about her case? Where is baby Emmanuel, missing for over a week now? And are his mom and dad in trouble? The sheriff's office gives us an answer. That's coming up next. Rebecca Harrow may have been caught on video after all. A week ago today, Harrow called 911 claiming a stranger knocked her out, kidnapped her 7-month-old baby boy Emmanuel while they were in a sporting goods store parking lot. Well, police have said there were no surveillance cameras in that lot at the time, but yesterday, a surveillance video suddenly surfaced, supposedly from a clothing store called Bada. It's right across the street. The video, posted by digital creator Ahmed Veloza on Twitter, allegedly shows Rebecca's car the night baby Emmanuel disappeared. But is it real, and is that Rebecca's actual car? We reached out to the San Bernardino County Police for confirmation, and they told us investigators are not releasing information regarding video obtained other than to say everything collected is being reviewed and investigated. It sounds kind of like a non-answer, but they did add this. Investigators have received surveillance video from several sources, including Bada. So this could really be huge news. By the way, they kind of confirmed that they have the video from there because Rebecca claims while she was at her parked car, a man approached her from behind before knocking her out. And that when she came to, both he and baby Emmanuel were suddenly gone. If the surveillance video is genuine and her car is on it, we don't see her being attacked, well, then it could mean the jig is up. Police have already said her story, frankly, just does not add up. But as of tonight, neither Rebecca nor her husband, Jake Harrow, have been arrested. The sheriff's office told us investigators have not ruled out anyone's involvement. We also asked about claims that the family members had not seen baby Emmanuel for a month. Sheriff's office says investigators that their investigation is ongoing and that no information is available for release. But then another strange twist. Yesterday, the Harrows were spotted leaving juvenile court. It's not clear exactly why they were there. Now remember, though, their other child, the 2-year-old, was removed from their home earlier this week. Last night, we reported that child was placed in the care of a cousin of Jake's ex-wife, who already had custody of 2 of his other children, including the child he was convicted of hurting in 2018, a crime that resulted in a charge of child cruelty. That baby was just 10 weeks old and ultimately suffered permanent damage, including blindness and even brain injuries. Now, if the Harrows are lying about what happened to baby Emmanuel, my next guest has seen the red flags before. Tommy Pope was the lead prosecutor in Susan Smith's trial, the South Carolina woman who drowned her own 2 children in 1994 and blamed a carjacker. Tommy, it's nice to see you. You know, I actually interviewed you right before Susan's parole hearing in South Carolina, so it's kind of interesting. I'm outside the prison now for the Menendez parole hearing, but I remember meeting you in your office that day. What is your take on this case, though, out of California? What stands out to you?
Well, I think, first of all, that, things not adding up, even outside, we as viewers can see that. For example, carjackers want cars. Carjackers want money. They maybe want a sexual assault. They don't take babies. So, 9 times out of 10, there's got to be some connection with the family or otherwise. That's the first thing. And if he assaulted her like he said, and when she came to, the baby was gone, it seems to me her purse would be gone, her car would be gone, her money would be gone. If someone's going to perpetrate that kind of crime, that would be the first thing that would step up. But, you were talking about law enforcement. They're in a difficult position because you have to do a dual investigation. You have to take what the family's given you, as the truth and seek that out. But that thing you can do is short sell them because something didn't add up and not follow every lead. So I'm sure law enforcement's following what the family has given them, but also following the obvious, which unfortunately looks like foul play on the part of the family.
So the mom, Rebecca Harrow, she's actually been compared to Susan Smith. People say both were insincere in the TV pleas, that there's inconsistencies. Do you see any similarities there? We all react different. I can remember having victims on the stand that would be sexually assaulted, but they'd be nervous and kind of giggle. So I always give everybody the benefit of the doubt. With Susan, she enjoyed the media attention so much that it continued, and it was all fun for her until the media started questioning her. Now, in this circumstance, it seems like you've got kind of the same victim type attitude from the potential defendant, the mother, but, she shut it down pretty quick, shut it down with the cooperation of law enforcement. She's now speaking through an attorney. And most parents will tell you, if my child's missing, law enforcement can ask, polygraph, whatever they need of me and my spouse to find my child. And it doesn't feel like that's where they're at. And cops wasted days, chasing down Susan's story. How do they decide whether to keep following what the parents are saying or go in a different direction, and when they think, something doesn't seem right here?
Sure. And, it's a style. Investigators have different styles, but basically, ideally, you do a dual investigation. And that's what kind of happened in Smith. To law enforcement's credit, they kept her on cooperating, so to speak. They kept her involved. They kept following her up. Of course, poor David, the dad, who you probably met when you were covering the parole, he had the classic deer in the headlights, find my child at all costs. And he was willing to cooperate anything. There came a time Susan didn't want to go on TV anymore, and her family kind of forced her because like I said, the fun had gone out of it. So law enforcement was always running a dual investigation. That's kind of a, law enforcement 101 to look close, because most time with children, I know we have human trafficking, but most time with a child that age, you're really looking at a family situation. You may be a domestic situation or something of that nature. And, you're hopeful because those normally get found out and you recover the child. But the way this one's going, it does not sound promising for the return of the child.
Yeah, we're all hoping for the best. You're right, though. It doesn't look good. Tommy Pope, nice to see you again. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Good to see you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, coming up next, I want you to ponder an ethical dilemma over the commercial break. If someone helps a serial killer to kill dozens of victims, is he just as guilty as the serial killer himself? What if that helper turns the tables and then kills the serial killer? This actually happened, and the man who helped the notorious Candyman serial killer is finally speaking out after 50 years behind bars. And wouldn't you know it, he spilled his guts to one of the best in the business. Friend of the show, Dr. Catherine Ramsland, renowned forensic psychologist. She's going to join me live next. So long before the names Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, or John Wayne Gacy were making headlines, an American serial killer was racking up a body count around Houston, Texas. Dean Corll, who was an electrician who was known to pass out candy to kids in the neighborhood. They affectionately called him the Candyman. What they didn't know was that over the span of 3 years, Dean Corll kidnapped, raped, tortured, and killed at least 28 boys and young men, and he did not do it alone. The Candyman had a couple of helpers. There were 2 teenagers, and those teenagers were actually responsible for some of those murders. But one day, at least one of the teenagers had had enough, and it was in 1973 that he shot Dean Corll dead. The Candyman may have died before he could be sent to prison, but his helpers, they were very much alive, and both of them were sent away for life. The teen who killed the Candyman was Elmer Wayne Henley, and Henley has now spent more than 50 years behind bars. Dr. Catherine Ramsland is a forensic psychologist and a friend of this program. She had the unique opportunity to speak with Henley, and she is featured prominently in a new investigation discovery documentary about his crime called The Serial Killer's Apprentice. Here's a preview. And Dr. Ramsland is here with me now. It's nice to see you, Dr. Ramsland. I've seen the documentary. It's really, really interesting. I recommend everybody watch it. It's just crazy that you were able to talk to this guy. You were surprised Elmer Wayne Henley actually wanted to talk to you. Why is that?
Well, he had tried in the past to talk with media and had been dismissed or had his story distorted, he thought. So the fact that he would make one more shot at it to see if somebody would represent his story, I think was kind of brave of him.
So what are we to make of him? Because he was a killer, but at the same time, he killed the main killer. Like, how are we supposed to process that? I mean, he was also a victim of this guy too. So like, what are we to make of him?
Well, he was killing under the influence of Dean Corll, who was the adult predator who brought the 2 teenage boys into being an accomplice to him. So it wasn't, he didn't initiate the murders. He didn't want to murder anybody. He was a compliant accomplice. And then at one point, there were 2 kids in the house, in Corll's house with him. Corll had them bound and had him bound, was going to kill them all. Wayne talked his way out of it, and when Corll put the gun down, Wayne saw an opportunity to stop him and grabbed it to save his friends and save himself, and also to put an end to this, because he was just tired of it. He knew Corll was never going to stop. This was the opportunity, and he took it.
What were you hoping to learn from Wayne in these jailhouse calls?
I wasn't really sure. I just knew that the original story that I had come to believe from an earlier true crime book was probably not accurate. And so I wanted to know more about him. And we also really had not looked at accomplices very much, had not really researched and studied them. And I hoped that he would be able to tell me his point of view, what it had been like to be pulled into this arrangement. Why had he stayed in this arrangement for 17 months? What was it like for him to become a killer? This is a kid who wanted to be a minister. How was a predator like Corll able to get him in that position and keep him there? So Wayne talked about it all. He went into great detail about it.
And how is that? I mean, I think that's the thing that you're sort of left wondering at the end of watching the documentary, is how someone can be, who's, had a rough upbringing, but, not violent, suddenly pulled into something like that.
Well, he was tricked and then leveraged, but also he's quite vulnerable because he had been raised in an unstable home where he had an abusive alcoholic father who had shot at him twice to kill him and had beaten his mother and grandmother in front of him. So he already had kind of a background of violence, and that made him vulnerable to someone like Corll, who came along and was like a big brother, and the father figure seems stable. And Corll had persuaded him to get involved in something that ended up being a murder. Once he was in it, and he was 15 years old, once he was in it, he didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating documentary. It's fascinating to hear you talking to him. Dr. Ramsland, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I was glad to be here.
The doc, by the way, it's called, again, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, streaming on Investigation Discovery, and also on HBO Max. All right, up next, it happens every year. Nearly 10 million people crane their necks to get a glimpse of a tiny painting over the shoulders of dozens of people in front of them. It's the Mona Lisa, located in the Louvre Museum, the real thing and a must for anyone taking in the sights in Paris. There is just one problem. It may not be the real thing. The Mona Lisa actually went missing on this date 114 years ago, and there is a theory the one that found its way back into the Louvre is actually fake. It's our True Crime Rewind, and it's coming up next. All right, so if you try to think of a famous painting, chances are the first thing that pops into your mind is the Mona Lisa. It's the most famous painting on Earth. And don't ask me, ask the 10 million people who flock to the Louvre Museum in Paris every year to see Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. But Miss Mona wasn't always an A-lister. She used to be a lot more obscure until something really bad happened to her 114 years ago today. She was actually stolen. On this date, 1911, a contractor named Vincenzo Perugia was installing protective glass over the paintings in the Louvre. When the museum was about to close, Mr. Perugia and his two henchmen decided to hide in a closet. And once they had the place to themselves, they lifted the Mona Lisa off the wall, removed it from its frame, and covered it in a blanket. Then, when the Louvre reopened for business the next day, they strolled out like nothing had even happened. Weirdly, it took more than 24 hours for anyone to notice that it was missing, and by then, Perugia, he had been back to Paris, to his apartment, where he hid the Mona Lisa in a false bottom trunk. And the theft, it made headlines around the world, with authorities declaring it the art heist of the century. And even though it had been painted way back in 1503, the Mona Lisa became the most famous painting in the world just overnight. In fact, before the heist, most people didn't even know about the painting. And as for the crime itself, police grilled the museum staff and members of the local art community. They even interrogated a little-known painter named Pablo Picasso. Detectives interviewed Perugia twice in his apartment, but did not consider him a suspect. But little did they know that during their interviews, they were resting their notebooks on top of the trunk where the painting was hidden. But more than 2 years after the Mona Lisa disappeared, Perugia was finally arrested when he tried to sell the painting to an art dealer in Florence, Italy. Perugia admitted to the theft and was sentenced to 8 months in prison, and the Mona Lisa was returned to the Louvre Museum. Or was she? In 1932, an Argentinian con man, first and only named Eduardo, said he was the real mastermind behind Perugia's theft. And once the painting was stolen, he said that he had 6 exact forgeries of the painting created. And he also said he sold them as the original to unsuspecting American billionaires. And there is some speculation, though, that Eduardo actually only sold 5 of the copies, and the 6th replica was the one that police recovered, the one that is hanging in the Louvre today. And maybe that explains Mona Lisa's coy little smile. Wouldn't that be something if that's not even really the original? Interesting to think about. All right, coming up, take a close look at this mugshot right here. A California woman decided not to smile, even though she had every reason to say cheese. When we come back, what she did with a wheel of Parmesan that may just shred her reputation. That one's coming up next. So I do like cheese as much as the next guy. In fact, I've been known to say it's good as crack, or so I'm told. But a young woman traveling the world has taken her love of Parmesan to a whole other level. 23-year-old Jamie Choi was nabbed at London's Heathrow Airport earlier this year. She'd just flown in from Brazil and decided to bring with her a 17-pound wheel of the good stuff, Parmesan cheese. But someone at the airport smelled a rat, and Jamie was hauled into secondary inspection, where upon a thorough examination of the wheel of Parmesan, custom agents found something even more addictive than the cheese. They found crack cocaine, 94% pure crack cocaine in the cheese. There was $1 million worth of crack embedded right in the cheese. How crazy is that? And alongside the Parmesan, a handwritten note that read, "I dropped out of University of California, Santa Barbara on Monday. Currently, I am in Paraguay in South America, solo traveling for the first time. It's been amazing so far. Well, no, not so amazing. The next half of decade of Jamie's life, because Ms. Choi pleaded guilty to charges of importing Class A drugs and was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. And there is no word if she had a meltdown. So that is how we are ending the show tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I am live tonight outside the prison, right outside San Diego. Mexico is like right over there. It's like I can see Mexico right over the fence. We're going to be here tomorrow for Lyle Menendez's parole hearing. We'll let you know what happens. Thanks for watching for the hour. Cuomo starts right now.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.